Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's Outdoor Florida webinar. A quick note, this session is being recorded and it will post to our website next week. Today, we are joined by Jill Lingard, who has spent more than 20 years working at the intersection of water and education in Florida. She has contributed her expertise to organizations such as Paddle Florida, the Florida Paddling Trails Association, and the Florida Springs Institute. Additionally, Jill has been a kayak instructor and trip leader with the Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers since 2019. Jill will be sharing the benefits of paddling clubs and how paddlers of all levels can connect with safe adventures, skill building, and a supportive community. After her presentation, we will open the floor to a Q&A session, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time, and we will address them at the end. Please join me in welcoming Jill. Jill, you may begin.
Great. Thank you, Casey. And thank you to everyone who's taken some minutes out of their schedule today to join us on my favorite thing to talk about in Florida, which is paddling in some form, usually kayaking for me. I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone in this call that Florida really is a paddling paradise. Some of the things that make it such, we certainly can enjoy year-round paddling. When we see all those icy, snowy pictures of our friends up north, that's often the best time of year, our winter months, to get out there. And actually, sometimes our summers take a little bit more care with the heat and afternoon thunderstorms, but really we can get out there 12 months of the year, which is really nice. And the waters are nice and warm too. We have a lot of different kind of waters to explore in Florida. Inland, our inland coastal waterways, rivers, creeks, lakes. One of my personal favorites is springs. Having done a lot of volunteer work with the Florida Springs Institute, all of those provide wonderful paddling opportunities. And then more coastally, of course, we have the Atlantic Ocean on one side of our state, the Gulf on the other, exploring islands. My new favorite place since moving to the Tampa Bay area are mangrove tunnels. I'll talk more about that, no doubt. So just a wide range of environments to immerse yourself in, which is really fun. And because of these qualities, really, we've got a lot of groups, a lot of guiding businesses out there to help us get out on the water and explore it. To give you a little bit of my background, and I want to say before I even jump into this, what I'm going to talk about today is going to be based on my 25-ish years as a kayaker in Florida. It's my personal experience with some of the groups, and I've been involved with a few groups related to paddling. I won't pretend to know every paddling club in the state of Florida. They change all the time. It'd be challenging to even keep up with that if I could. But I'm hoping me sharing my story and some of the groups I've been involved with might spark some interest and ideas for you to enrich your own paddling experience and maybe even share some of the groups and clubs and businesses even that you've paddled with. I would enjoy hearing about that after the formal presentation. As it says here, I lived in Gainesville for over 30 years. I was one of those go away to college and stay for a very long time. Actually ended up working for the University of Florida for most of those years. Being an inland town, it was mostly in rivers and springs that I cut my new paddling teeth on. We had rivers surrounding us. The Ichitopney, the Swanee was a little bit north of us. To the south, Silver and Rainbow were wonderful spring-fed streams. And I spent a lot of time in those waters, growing up, as you will, and paddling. Occasionally we get out to the coast. Most often that was usually the West Coast. Cedar Key was about an hour's drive from where we lived, and that was a fun spot to explore. Occasionally over on the Atlantic side, St. Augustine area. My first kayak purchase was in the year 2000. We had kind of rented up until then. And I still have this kayak sitting in my garage, or hanging in my garage, I should say. It's a 13.5-foot plastic Dagger Callisto. I used it last weekend on a Springs Watch session on Kings Bay, and I'll be using it again this weekend. I'll be loaning it out to someone. So it still gets a lot of use. A change in job for my husband moved us from the Gainesville area to Tampa Bay. We're in the Riverview community in 2017. And that meant a whole different kind of water to explore, and a much bigger kind of water than we were used to with the Gulf of Mexico out there. Part of that move, actually, before we even started filling boxes to move, I actually joined Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers and was excited to see that there was a paddling club related to that area. I figured we'd learn about our new community through its waterways, which was always fun for us. We're both water people. And I figured a lot of the people in that club, or some of them anyway, would become my new tribe. So I was excited to get involved with them even before we actually made the move. I did seek some more training from some of the trainers in the area. I'm actually currently a certified L3 instructor through the American Canoe Association. And to help me get used to some of the new things that I needed to be prepared for in bigger, often bouncier, windier water. While I still have the kayak I started out with, and my husband still has his, we did upgrade to Nigel Dennis kayaks. I have both a regular Pilgrim and a Pilgrim Expedition kayak, which are fiberglass and composite boats. So we're spending a little more time in our sea kayaks these days than our recreational boats, but we enjoy both. Before I get into talking about Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers, I wanted to share with you some of the things that go through my mind when I'm considering going for a paddle with a group. And at the end of this list, you might think I'm a very stressed out individual, but actually, I just like to think through how these things will be handled so I can enjoy myself on the water. Especially when it's a group I'm not familiar with, I think about things like who else is going and what's their skill level. Is anybody in charge of this trip? Is there a trip leader and what's their experience and training? What's the float plan? And I'll talk more about that in a few slides, but a float plan is basically just the plan of where we're launching, where we're going, what we're doing along the way, when we're going to get back, all the things that you can think about in terms of what's going on the water during our trip. Are the folks in charge familiar with that plan? Are they familiar with the area? Have they paddled it before? How are the leaders or the leader, how is he or she communicating with our group leading up to the trip and during the trip while we're on the water? If some kind of an emergency goes down, is anybody equipped to deal with that? It doesn't have to be a huge crisis, but might someone have a marine radio with them? Somebody goes over. That's a common occurrence. Does anybody know how to rescue them and get them back in their boats? This next bullet's a very important one to me. What's the wind, weather, and water forecast? Are our leaders paying attention to that? That's something when I'm leading a trip, I'm thinking about all these factors and I want to make sure I have a plan in place to deal with them. Assuming I survived the first trip with this group, is this the kind of group, are these the kind of people I want to come paddle with again because they handled these things appropriately? Now, that may look like a very stressful list to some. My husband accused me of that. But the point I want to make with that is a little bit of trip planning and preparation on these kinds of issues really can make for a much happier, relaxed, fun paddle. And that's kind of the theme I want to run through the information I share about Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers and some of the other groups that I want to mention. So getting into Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers, my hometown group, you'll see adventure, skill building, and friendship on here. And really that echoes the mission of our organization. Adventure is about exploring the waterways all around us. Skill building, I'll talk more about each of these. We practice a lot of different skills that make us all safer on the water, and it's fun learning. And just making connections, paddler to guides in the area, paddler to skill building opportunities, paddler to other organizations to do volunteer work with as paddlers. These are the kinds of things that we're all about in Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers. I wanted to mention that our organization turned 30 this year, which is somewhat unusual to have a paddling club in Florida that has lasted that many years. As you can see, we had a small beginning, as many do, started as a district within the Florida Sea Kayaking Association in 1993. It broke off from there and became its own club in 96 with just 20 members, mainly from our two home counties here, our Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. And you can see we've grown to over 160 members today from 10 counties. Those are mostly the west central counties in Florida, the Florida Peninsula. I will say, however, while we have that number of 160, and you'll see this theme repeated with a few other clubs, we're not taking trips with 160 folks on them. We have, I would say, a core active group of anywhere from 25 to, say, 45 members that we routinely see on all of our trips. So to break each of those theme areas out, I just wanted to say more about the different missions. The first and foremost, everybody joins a paddling club because they want to get out there and go paddling. So paddling adventures is certainly a top one. I mentioned the West Central area, which you can see on the map there. Hernando, I think, is about as north as any of our members are, although I can think of at least one gal in Gainesville. All the way down to Sarasota County, I think, is where our most southerly members are. So that's a wide area with a lot of what we do happening in that still in the Pinellas and Hillsborough area. We explore all kinds of waters while sea is in our name, Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers. And certainly we are out on the coastal waters all the time. There's lots of rivers and springs and lakes and other kinds of creeks and other water bodies to explore in our area, and we do a lot of that as well. We have an online calendar of events that really manages what we're doing. And if there's time later, I'd be happy to kind of click through there and show you how it works. But basically, this calendar is where we post our trips and their descriptions. And folks can see what the trip is all about, the length of it, who's going. You register there, and trip leaders can get a sense of how many people are coming on their trip and what their backgrounds are. So it's really effective means to manage all of our trips. Um, I'd say 95% of what we do are day trips, ranging anywhere from an hour or two to maybe more like 5 or 6 if we're doing a longer kind of trip. We have added more recently, my husband and I have gotten into this, a new weekender option. And the way that's played out recently is we'll rent a house somewhere in an area where we can explore a few different water bodies. And then over 2 to 3 days, we'll paddle different aspects of that. This played itself out really beautifully last February. We were in the final weeks of the drawdown of the Ocklawaha River in Rodman Reservoir, which reveals a bunch of springs and a really interesting sort of drowned cypress forest to explore that normally wouldn't look like that when waters are at the dammed level. So we were able to explore, it's a very long river. We were able to explore sections of it on a Saturday and a Sunday. And many of our, gosh, I think we had almost 20 folks come up. Some of them shared the house with us, others camped, others got their own arrangements, but we kind of hung out in the North Central Florida area over a February weekend and had a great time exploring a really beautiful river at a wonderfully unusual time because that drawdown only happens every 3 or 4 years. So that's one thing we're doing more exploring and it's lengthening the time that we're out there having our paddling adventures. Just wanted to include some photos here of some of our recent trips. I guess I'll start in the upper left corner. I thought at first that might be a mangrove tunnel, but actually I think that's a shady part of the Hillsborough River, which is a beautiful stream in our area. The long picture up top there is the outside of Weeden Island Preserve, which is an area with a lot of mangrove tunnels. This is the more open water part of it in Tampa Bay. This is obscured by our photos here, but the top right photo, if I'm remembering right, is of the Alafaya River, which is very close to us in Riverview. Both the Hillsborough and the Alafaya eventually empty out into the Gulf, by the way. Continuing clockwise, I mentioned the drawdown on Reservoir Dam, or the Rodman Reservoir, excuse me, and that was our paddle of that area during the drawdown, which was really nice. Our middle bottom photo there is of the Weeki Wachee River last summer. I think we're going to try to hit that one again because we like to do the cooler spring waters when the temperature soars in the summer. And then finally, now I'm not 100% sure where that lower left photo is. I think it's the Gulf somewhere, possibly out by Fred Howard Park. It might actually also be E.G. Simmons Park, a little bit south of there. But it's one of our Gulf photos. Also, can't resist posting some shots that our members have taken of the wildlife we see while we're out there. Of course, manatees are ever present in our area, especially in the springs. And I think that one was taken by one of our paddlers on the Weeki Wachee River. The photo right below that in the middle, I talked about during the Rodman Reservoir drawdown, how many springs are revealed that normally would be drowned by the artificially high waters. That is Cannon Spring on the Ocklawaha River, and it's exactly a great example of that. Lots of neat bird photos on the middle left here. Within minutes of us launching from Fred Howard Park in Tarpon Springs a couple months ago, this pod of about a dozen dolphin greeted us, and that that many dolphin was unusual, but we see dolphin in the bay almost every time we're out there. That's really fun. And I also wanted to mention middle right. I don't know if John Shinner's on this call, but this is his photo. He's a wonderful photographer. That's a cormorant out at Fort DeSoto Park. And I wanted to mention that in particular because they have sort of an unusual behavior there. I think from all the paddlers and paddling businesses that are out there putting paddlers on the water there, the cormorants have learned that if they follow our kayaks closely, the shadow that our kayaks are casting in the water, fish often gather in there. And so they swim really close to us and dive below our boats. Sometimes it's hard almost not to hit them with your paddle. They're so intent on fishing. We see that just about every time we're at Fort DeSoto, and it's a lot of fun. I'm not sure how much our fishermen kayakers enjoy that, but it's really fun to see that. And of course, the ever-present alligator in the lower right there. People often say, do you paddle with alligators? And I often say, well, if I'm not seeing them, they're probably seeing me because they're all over Florida. And as long as you give them wide berth, they're okay. So getting into the next mission, which is about safety, I wanted to mention a few ways that Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers approaches that. First of all, we take our trip leaders really seriously. We want to make sure they're trained. They know what they're doing. We vet them. We offer tons of opportunities really every month to have them brush up on their skills if they need to. This is an important position in our club. We wouldn't have the club if there weren't folks willing to lead trips. So we want to make sure they're equipped with the knowledge and gear and everything they need to make good decisions. I'm going to share this with you in a moment. I think it's on my next slide. But we also rate every one of our trips so that trip leaders can feel comfortable in what they're agreeing to do. But also, if I'm a member wondering about whether I should go on a trip, I can see what it's all about and match that with my own self-assessment of my skills. So it starts at the recreational level and goes all the way up through level 3. And I'll talk more about how that plays out in a moment. I think we all keep our trips to really the trip leader gets to control this, but to very manageable leader to paddler ratio for the trips that my husband and I lead. And I think most folks, that's generally about a 5-to-1 ratio so that we have lots of folks on the water, whether they're actually at the lead of the group or in it or even sweep. Lots of trained folks on the water to be able to help folks out if something goes wrong. All of our paddlers on every trip, it's not just have a PFD or a life jacket on your boat, it's on your body and zipped up and worn appropriately. That's a big one, and it's an issue that I get a lot of eye rolls on as I really try to convince other folks to wear life jackets and some of the other water-based activities I do. Not having it on your body properly fitted and done up to me is like trying to put your seatbelt on in your car after the crash. One of the activities that we love to do when we're doing some rescue training is invite our paddlers to fall out of their boats without in safe waters, shallowish waters. And without their life jacket on, and then try to retrieve this life jacket and put it on while they're in the water. It takes a lot more energy than you might think it would, and that's under a very controlled circumstance. Now add maybe some bumpy waters that made you go over and you weren't expecting to do that, so your stress level is high, and maybe you secured that PFD under a bunch of bungees on your boat, or worse yet, it's in a hatch that you have to somehow get to. all of those factors don't make for a really good situation for you're rescuing you and you being okay. So we're very serious about wearing of a PFD. I'll tell you another secret to that my own evolution as a paddler. When I first started kayaking, I didn't have it on my body either. It was under the bungees. And then a talk with a gentleman who was one of our trip leaders on a Paddle Florida trip years ago. He said to me, "No, Jill, if something were to happen to you, I have the skills to be able to rescue you." I didn't have those skills at the time, but you're not wearing a PFD makes it much harder for me to do that. Not saying I won't be able to do it, but it's going to be a whole lot harder. And that finally convinced me that, okay, if I'm not going to do this for myself, I certainly want to make it easier on those who would want to help me out if I did get into trouble. So for all those reasons, this is just a non-negotiable that all people on our trips have to wear a PFD. And then ongoing training opportunities within our club. We try very hard, weather permitting, and schedule permitting, to offer some kind of training opportunity every month in our club. So folks who are trip leaders or not, they can just be regular paddlers at any level, are welcome to brush up their skills in a bunch of different kinds of areas. And I think our next slide, actually, we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. I wanted to first walk you through, and I'm going to need glasses for this, our skills assessment chart that we share with all of our members. And you can see this is how we're dividing our paddle trips into recreation level, level 1, level 2, and level 3. Probably the most important information for a lot of people, they want to know, how far are we going? What's the conditions of the water all about? And actually, that's towards the bottom of this. You'll see our recreational paddlers are expecting a paddle of under 5 miles, 2 to 5 miles. Um, our level 1 folks, I'm sorry, are up to 5 to 10 for our level 2 folks, and over 10 miles for our level 3 people. We get into the kind of water and the wind. That's why paying attention to this forecast is so important. And you can see the different levels there, starting with calm, going up to it might be over 3 feet. Maybe it's a surfing type of trip. And 3 feet may not sound like a whole lot of wave to some boaters, but when you're in a kayak, that's up there. That's way up there. And then our wind forecasts can make a big difference for the experience on the water too. So you can see that. The rest of these are about the kinds of skills that you have, the kind of gear that we're expecting you to wear, whether you're in a spray skirt and kind of attached to your boat more. But folks can get a sense of, not just from the verbal description of our trips, but how our trip leaders have rated these trips, what their expectations can be. And then if they had any questions about any of that, every trip leader includes their contact information and their trip descriptions, and folks are encouraged to contact trip leaders if they have any questions or concerns about their own ability to be on a trip. Part of one of the best things we can all do as trip leaders, in terms of making it safer and more fun on the water, is thoroughly vetting everyone who's coming and making sure the right people have signed up for the right kind of trip. So trip leaders are happy, and those who are on their trips can keep up and have a good time as well. I've posted here one of the resources TBSK includes on the website, is a sample float plan. And these are the kinds of details that a float plan entails. This is the kind of thing that you should do for any trip that you take, whether you're with a paddling club or just paddling with a friend or going out on your own. And oftentimes these are just details you can email to a friend, your shore contact, if you will. The beauty of our trip postings on our calendar is really they serve as a sort of a float plan, for anyone who's going on our trips, just as long as the folks going on those trips share a link to that trip to the shore contacts that they have. But it sort of serves that double purpose, which is nice. Here are the kinds of topics that we try to cover in our monthly training sessions. And I did want to mention that one of the board positions we have within Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers is a safety and training coordinator. We've had the great good fortune of having Ant Sousa be in that position for, I think this is going on his 3rd year. He is a local certified L5 kayak instructor and a guide for not just around Florida, but really all over the country and world. He has provided us wonderful training sessions and guidance for other folks to lead sessions as well. It's really wonderful to have him in our group and be able to tap into his expertise on many levels. But you can see here some of the topics that we like to cover, basic strokes and maneuvers. We love to get into rescues in the hot months. We've got a June and July session coming up on that because it's so warm out and we want to get wet. This is a great time of year to fall out of your boat on purpose and figure out how to get back in it. Some of our more advanced kayakers are learning or refining different kinds of rolls. And that's when when you fall over into the water and you're able to come back up without getting out of the boat. We had a recent session a couple months ago, maybe more than that now, on towing, which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun because it ended up with others in the class towing my husband and I, and that's always nice. We've done sessions on navigation and use of VHF radios. And actually, next Tuesday, I think it is, we're going to be offering a session on Greenland kayaking and the different skills associated with that. It's a different paddle involved with that. And while many of the core principles are the same as regular Euro blade paddling, especially where the rolls are concerned, it can kind of get into new territory. That's a lot of fun too. And again, some photos associated with that context. So upper left corner looks like we've got some towing going on. In the middle there, top is, I think that's me being rescued by one of our members. An assistant, I'm probably in the middle of doing a heel hook rescue there, which means my foot's kind of helping me get back in the boat there. Upper right-hand side, it looks like my husband Scott is doing a draw stroke. That was probably a strokes and maneuvers class. I mentioned the Greenland class we've got going on next week. That's Tom Malone helping someone with a roll there, and he'll be at that again with us this coming Tuesday. Looks like we've got a self-rescue going on in the bottom right. It looks like it's paddle float assisted, so we try to get out different tools like paddle floats and stirrups and things to show that there's different ways to get back into your boat. Bottom left would be more of they call it a cowboy self-rescue, where you're getting on the back of the boat and pulling yourself forward into the cockpit. You can see why these would be great things to do when it's hot outside because we're getting soaking wet, of course. Middle left looks like another Greenland class, and it's a wonderful example of some edging going on in that photograph. And I wanted to mention lower right, by the way, on the left in that picture is Aunt Sousa. What he's probably demonstrating there on land are some of the principles to think about in a forward stroke, which is, I think, one of the most challenging strokes to teach. Kind of like a golf swing. There's like 20 things to think about while you're doing it. And part of that is pushing on foot pegs and getting great core rotation. Honestly, about all your arms are doing is holding up the paddle. The energy and the power comes from your whole body, from your toes all the way up into your shoulders. So I think he's demonstrating some of that on land before we practice it in the water. So that's a little bit on the kinds of training sessions that we do, and they're a lot of fun. And then finally, just doing what we can to forge connections. I chatted a little bit about this earlier. Certainly all of our group paddles and paddle sessions bring people together. Also once a month, we do picnic gatherings. And what that means is we'll pick a location where we'll try to offer from the same launch point a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, a rec level if that's possible, or at least some part of those from the same location. And then at the end of those, we all gather and enjoy lunch together. Every month, we host meetings and guest speakers, kind of like this. And those can range from, actually last night, our own Aunt Sousa talked to us about his training and guiding business. We've had folks talk to us about the flora and fauna in the area, different guides and outfitters from around Florida, around the country, frankly, around the world. I remember we had someone from the island of Dominica who offers paddling trips and wanted to tell us more about that. Really anything even tangentially related to kayaking. Sometimes it's members sharing their awesome vacations or paddling vacations to places. and we want to learn more about that so we can maybe go in the future. That's another way of bringing people together, often via Zoom, I will say, because we're so spread out among all those counties that it's often easier to do this online, but occasionally we also get together in real time and space and enjoy others' company as well. A few of these photos mention some more community or volunteer events. The bottom spring-oriented photo there is actually a Springs Watch session on Kings Bay, and that's actually within Three Sisters Springs there. Kings Bay Springs Watch is a group that goes out every month to sample the waters, take some measurements, do various things, and they're always looking for volunteers. So once or twice a year, since Scott and I, my husband and I lead that group, we'll make it a TBSK outing, and we've had some fun times with our members on that. Middle right photo, I believe, is at Caladesi Island, and this has been a good, gosh, a year maybe ago. I can't remember exactly when we did this, but we helped them with an island cleanup post dreadful hurricanes that had come through here and really kind of trashed many of our barrier islands. So we had a nice day there helping them gather some trash and some rather big items, as you can see there. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out. That's one of my duties, and we try to build community and keep folks apprised of what's going on in the club and what they can get involved on then with that. I mentioned our weekender trips, and actually we have a very active board that has positions for all of these kinds of things I'm mentioning. So that's a good way to collaborate and share ideas and come up with new plans with your fellow paddlers. So a lot going on there to build friendship among our community of paddlers. And I'm sure we're not unusual there as paddling clubs go. I wanted to share these next few slides just because without my coaching them on what to say, some of our members really gave me quotes that just so beautifully exemplified the mission that we have. Pat Yaden has had many positions on our board. At the moment, she's our webmaster. She talks about new friends. It's how it's improved her skills. She's enjoying the outdoor experiences. There's our missions right there. Phil Sheasley has been with the club a number of years. I want to say he was a past president. Talks about enjoying the company of his friends, staying safe, learning new skills. Again, you just see what's important to these folks and how TBSK has allowed them to hit all of those areas, which I think is nice. By the way, I believe where he is out in front of Egmont Key out in Tampa Bay, which is a neat place to paddle. I recognize those ruins. And Tom Sobosinski, another one of our former trip leaders. I want to say he might have been our training director for a while too, if I'm not mistaken. And you'll see his journey when he first started was a newer paddler with few skills and till he was a trip leader. And then I think training the trip leaders are doing a lot to train them in different kinds of wind and water conditions as his own skills build. That's the ideal situation for us. We love to meet folks who are new to the sport, excited about it, and interested in maybe building their journey with us in terms of gaining more skills. And you'll usually find that a few new boats come along the way as their skills progress, but it's really fun to be a part of that journey for folks. So an invitation to join us, to join TBSK, Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers. Our annual membership fee is just $25 for an individual, $35 for family. I've got to tell you, if you go on one trip or do one training, your membership is paid for itself because you would spend more than that on even one of those experiences if you had to rent a boat or go on a guided trip somewhere, and certainly if you sought professional training of any sort. All of our members have to sign a liability waiver. That's part of the sign up process. And it's an online thing. And once that's done, you're covered for all of your activities and trips with us for the year. There's the link that you can click on to join us there. Some other resources that I wanted to mention that are on our website. And I think that folks, even if you're not a member, can access all or some, at least some of these things. There's just a lot of good information if you're looking into wanting to paddle in the Tampa Bay area. I mentioned the float plans, just a great listing. I think it's by county of great paddling trails to explore. If you're just visiting the area and want to explore it, and check out some places. Check out the information there on our website, or join TBSK for a paddle. We have a thing where you can join us for one, and after that, we want you to join. But come check us out, go on a paddle with us, and see what you think. The trip leader training information that we make available out there is not only great information for trip leaders, of course, but for anybody who is interested in building their skills. These are the kinds of things you're going to want to work on and look into getting better at. And that pays dividends whether you're with Tampa Bay Sea Kayakers, another group, or just paddling on your own. Great, helpful links to websites and apps for wind forecasts, weather, tides are a biggie. That was a big change for me coming down from Gainesville. It was all rivers and springs, and by and large, we never, tides didn't even enter our brains until we came down here. And by screwing that up, went, oh yeah, tides matter here. We need to pay attention to that. Especially in some locations at low tide, you'll have no water to paddle in. Um, and then water quality information can be very important, particularly in the summer when we sometimes get a little higher dose of red tide and some other funky organisms. We've got a buy and sell forum for kayaks and paddle gear on our website, which is very useful. I've seen folks get some new to them boats and other gear at really great deals through that. Our newsletter certainly lets folks know what's going on, and lots of other resources for paddlers in general. Many of the guest speakers that we have, we videotape those talks and post those. And that's a great way to learn about wonderful guided trips you can take, really not just in Florida, but all wherever our guest speakers are coming from, and a lot of about the skills training and things that they do in that area as well. So TBSK as a website is just a nice paddling resource as well. More information, just tbsk.club. You can email us at the email you see there if you have any questions. And we also have a Facebook page presence that you can join and be a part of. And these wonderful new shirts that you see there, that's a new thing within the last year. So before I wrap things up, I wanted to at least highlight a couple other clubs that just personally I see doing really neat things. And a lot of times that comes through a Facebook photo or some kind of post, and it's just really great to see that. Wanted to first give a big shout out to the Paradise Coast Paddling Club, who's been at this a while too, since 2005. They do a lot of different kinds of trips, ranging in, it's kind of like us, from first timers to more long distance, fast paced trips for more experienced paddlers. Sometimes they do camping trips. They're based in the Naples area, so a little south of us. They certainly have a safety emphasis. Like us, their PFDs are mandatory. Life jackets must be worn. I see them doing a lot of different kinds of practice sessions or skills practice, but rescues play an important part of that. I believe they try to meet the second Wednesday of every month. Here's a link to their site, and it's part of the Paddle Sports of Naples business, which is run by the wonderful Jay Rose. He's been at this a while too, and is a wonderful resource both in the Naples area and throughout Florida. I have to give Jay a shout out for many of us who have composite or fiberglass boats. Whenever those need repair, he is the man for that. And it's hard to find that skill. It's not everywhere. He's known for that. So I want to give him a big shout out there. And finally, South Florida Paddlers out of the Miami area. They were founded a little more recently, 2017. You can see they're covering really all of South Florida there, southeast Florida, Broward, Miami, and then Monroe County into the Keys. I saw them grow to over 10,000 Facebook members. I think some of that happened during COVID when we all went berserk indoors and finally realized we could go outside, and that was good. Um, but like TBSK, while we don't have 10,000 Facebook members, there's a smaller, more reasonable core group that actually gets out there and goes on trips. And you can see they're in the 45-ish range there. They host monthly meetups that are open to the public. And then they do a lot of paddles that you need to be a member of their organization, and to hear about and do. And let me just say, as I said in the slide here, these folks get around the state of Florida. every post I see, I'll see them in the Western Panhandle here and in the Keys there, and maybe up in the Tomoka River or what have you in the middle part of the state. They get around the state. A lot of what they do is South Florida, but they travel a lot too. They certainly promote safety through a lot of the skills training opportunities that they give. In fact, a couple of their members, and probably more, are involved in the state nonprofit organization, the Florida Paddling Trails Association, which I'll say more about in a moment. So that they're very well versed in safety and training topics, and like to give those sessions, make those sessions available to their members. The link is here, and again, a shout out to David Chen, who I've had the joy of paddling with before. And he's also not only their founder, but the current president of the Florida Paddling Trails Association, and a very busy guy. In fact, I want to say you all, OGT hosted a session that he gave a few months ago, which is great. A few other organizations and entities that I wanted to mention before closing things out. I have to start with the Office of Greenways and Trails. This is not only an OGT presentation or hosted presentation, but in particular, because there's so much on their page, I wanted to point out when you click on their main website, a few of the things that are really great for paddlers. First of all, in terms of just information on where to go, they've got Florida designated paddling trails. When I'm especially giving a paddle more inland, oftentimes, sometimes on a river, the first thing I'm going to is to see if OGT has designated this an official trail, because the information they have for those trails is just fantastic. So that's a fabulous resource. More coastally, they've got similar information for the entire rim of the state of Florida. We've got folks that paddle the entire 1,515 mile, what is it? The Florida Saltwater Circumnavigational Saltwater Paddling Trail. And others that just want to explore maybe a day trip's worth of it. And whether you're in it for the long term or just doing a day trip, there's fantastic information about all of the places, the put-ins, the launches, the camping opportunities around the perimeter of the state. I mentioned the Florida Paddling Trails Association, wonderful resource, wonderful organization. Really, they're the stewards of our paddling trails. There's another organization that puts out fantastic paddling trail information. They have organized the state of Florida, which is big, into different segments or different regions, and then those are further broken down into segments, so you can really break it down into the area that you're exploring and get fantastic paddling information. They put on awesome events. They just had a great paddle fest in April that brought people together around the Silver River area. Great organization to support, fun group of folks. Paddle Florida is another nonprofit organization. They are leading folks on multi-day trips, bigger groups around the state of Florida. I think their season starts in November now and goes through April, and roughly monthly, they're offering those opportunities. One of the neat things about that group, especially if you're a little bit newer to the idea of a paddle expedition over more than one day, is they will carry your camping gear and they'll feed you. So those are the main two things that are hard to logistically put together oftentimes. They're more challenging for paddlers. They're taking those off the table so people can just get out there and paddle and the rest is on them. So that's a neat kind of gateway into exploring waterways over several days. I've sort of hinted at Florida Springs Watch throughout this presentation because that's another organization I'm involved with. There are 11 Springs Watch groups in the state, and roughly, I'd say half of them do what they do, take their measurements from paddlecraft of some sort. Kings Bay Springs Watch is one of those. Check that organization out, look at where they are, and maybe there is a Springs Watch group near you, and that's an opportunity for you to take your paddling skills and apply them, sort of paddling with a purpose. You can apply them to doing good, if you will. The research that this organization collects really is used to help protect and restore, in many cases, Florida springs. And same idea with Apalachicola River Trek. This is a group dedicated to Apalachicola River Keeper out in the Panhandle. They have an annual trek or an annual trip that where they paddle. A team of paddlers travels the entire length of the Apalachicola River in Florida and raises money and awareness for the river. Usually that happens in mid-October. I want to say maybe the deadline is expired for this year's river trek, but it comes around every year. I've done this a couple times, and it's a wonderful group, very organized, very safety oriented, and so much fun. We had a blast. And finally, I want to mention TRAX, which stands for Traditional Kayakers of the South. This is a Greenland-focused paddling group, and every, I would say, Mayish, April, Mayish, this group gets together for a long weekend and brings in coaches from not just Florida, but around the country to really get at Greenland skills. Rolling is big because there's a lot of different kinds of rolls in that style of kayaking. But it's a delightful group, wonderful coaches, one-on-one time with them, and just a really supportive group. If you're new to that style of kayaking, they'd love to have you. They're always trying to build that community. So those are some of the organizations that I'm familiar with. I think that's the material I wanted to cover in terms of what I'm familiar with in the paddling world in Florida. I'd be more than delighted to open it up for questions and also comments from any of you who are involved with organizations or clubs that you're proud of and want to share.
All right. Thank you so much, Jill. That was a wonderful presentation. We actually have some questions in the chat already. The first question is, how many trained leaders do you have for your club?
So I'm going to guess at this. I want to say our list is probably approaching 20. Um, but I don't know that every single one of those folks is active. As I think about our calendar of trips and who I see out there a lot, I would say about a dozen people are leading trips on a more regular basis.
All righty. The next question is, how does one go about starting a paddling club?
That's a great question. Um, that's a hard one for me because I haven't personally done it. But I would say that the first step is probably about gauging interest with like-minded folks in the area that you're in, especially if you sense there is a need in an area not being filled. And then if that were me, let's pretend TBSK didn't exist and I wanted to do it here. I think my next step would be to talk to folks who do have experience in building such a community. And the two people I mentioned when I talked about other clubs would be great folks to probably chat with about that. They might further refer you to others that they've worked with. But David Chen certainly helped build South Florida Paddlers from scratch. I'm sure he wasn't alone in doing that. And Jay Rose had, I think he got in the ground floor or close to it with the Paradise Coast Paddlers Club. And if he didn't have all the answers, I know he is in contact with folks in that organization who could tell you their story and walk you through the kinds of things to look out for.
Okay. Is your group also open to paddle boarders?
Here's the situation with that. We're not closed to them, but I'm going to tell you that other than maybe one person I can think of who's a dear friend, most paddle boarders would not keep up with like the sea kayak you see in the picture on our screen right now. It's just the nature of how those two crafts move and how the paddles are. Um, so what can happen is if you have, and I'm speaking in generalities here, but if you had a few sup or paddle boarders and some sea kayakers, it would take minutes before they were stretched out on the water. And that's why we don't need people paddling hand in hand. Part of what we do as trip leaders is have a sense of group management on the water, so that if something goes down, we can see it, we can respond as needed. That's going to be much tougher to manage with that different kind of craft on the water. Now, I'll tell you where we broke that rule with intention. A few years ago, again, and the summers are hot in Florida. That's not a news flash. We're often trying to seek out spring-fed waters just because they're cooler. And a couple summers ago, we led a trip on the Rainbow River and broke it into a few groups. And actually, Scott and I own a paddle boards. We love it too, especially over spring-fed streams, because from a standing position, you can see everything in the water, every fish, every blade of eelgrass. It's beautiful. So we led the slower paddleboardy side of the group and started from a different place. And the kayakers started way downstream, certainly caught up and blew past us, but we all kind of ended up in the same place. So I think you can do that with intentionality. I don't know that that kind of trip would work so well out in the middle of Tampa Bay. So there are probably some groups in Florida that are a little more dedicated to paddleboarders. And we're not saying never with TBSK. We just don't do that a lot because it's tricky to mix the two craft and keep it how we want it to be on the water.
Another question popped up. Do you know of any paddling clubs in the West Panhandle?
Oh, goodness. So one resource I want to put out there, and I'm not sure they're going to be on this list, but Florida Paddling Trails Association, if you click on that link, one of the tabs across their website is there's for their supporters. And if you click that drop down box, one group they recognize are all the paddling clubs that have joined and supported FPTA as paddling clubs. So that will give you a list, not an exhaustive list, because every paddle club in Florida hasn't joined FPTA, but those who have are out there. Um, if there's anybody else on this call that can answer this question, I want to say there was a West Florida Canoe and Kayak Club at some point, and I don't know if it's still active. But that's something to Google and check out on. And I think they were somewhere in the more Western Panhandle. But if there isn't one, maybe it's time for folks on this call to start one.
All right. Well, that was all the questions in the chat. So,
Okay,
if that's all the questions everyone has, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. A huge thank you to Jill for her insightful presentation and to all of you for joining us today.
great.
Next month, we will hear
Hey,
from
Casey.
Jason Vicker. He is, did someone say
Um,
something?
yeah, hi, it's Cassidy from
Oh,
OGT.
yeah.
I think Jordan Holiday has their hand raised. Might have a question.
Uh, I don't see it. Is there something in like
Hello.
the Q and? Oh, hi.
Yeah, I do have a question. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
yeah. No, go ahead.
Um, Thank you, Jill, so much for that presentation. It was amazing. So I work with the Sierra Club's Florida chapter, and being a national organization, we were kind of at the will of the national club on when to start back our outings after COVID, which had a really big hit on our volunteer base.
Sure.
I wanted to just ask about your experience on how you guys bounce back after COVID, how your volunteer retention is. Did you find, like a new wave of volunteers? Just want to hear a little bit more about
I'll tell you what, and I'm sure we're not unusual, we absolutely took a hit on that. We went from offering up to a dozen or so trips per month to, first of all, nothing for several months. Um, it probably took us, and I'm good, my memory's a little fuzzy on this, but probably a good year or so to actually get back out on the water. And then we were doing it as much as we could in much more social distancing ways. I can remember doing some training here locally where we figured out in practice ways to rescue another paddler in a more socially distanced way, which is tricky. If you know anything about a kayak rescue, you're kind of right up together helping each other out. Um, so yes, it definitely took us a good year or more to get back on the water. Um, and this is probably not news for many of those who are involved with paddling groups, but our age range skews a little more elderly. I would say our average age in TBSK is mid 50s. And I know some awesome, amazing paddlers that are in their 60s and 70s, even 80s. So yeah, COVID took a toll on that bunch. And if they survived it, maybe they weren't themselves for quite some time and it took them a while to get back. I feel like we are finally getting back to close to what we were pre-COVID just within the last year or two. So we absolutely felt that for sure.
Alrighty. I see a question that popped up from Debbie. Yes, there is going to be the recording posted to our site sometime next week. And I'll also try to post the presentation so you can click on the links within the presentation. And I don't see any other questions or hands raised. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. And if anyone thinks of any questions or is interested in presenting their own topic, they can email us at Office of Greenways and Trails at floridadep.gov. So we will see you all next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.